Well, thanks everyone for joining me. As those of you have already seen in the invitation, my name is Joe Di Grande. I'm the founder and CEO of Joe Does Tech Touch. Today, we're going to talk about something that I'm passionate about, but also has really reshaped modern CS teams. And not just how they operate, and not just by doing more with less, but really just how to retain, grow, and scale without adding that headcount through building Tech Touch. So if you're wondering how to scale CS without spinning your wheels, you're in the right room. But before we jump into it, give you a little bit of background on me. So I've spent the last 10 plus years building tech touch strategies. They're also known as digital CS strategies. We'll talk about that in a bit. But at companies like eMarketer, Saros, and most recently, I was the VP of CS and sales at Business Insider. And we're talking we've increased NRR by 25% for a book of over $10 million in ARR, and even reallocated around 8 to 10 CSMs to focus on strategic growth accounts, which is one of the biggest impacts. Now I help companies scale their post-sales motion by launching and optimizing tech touch and digital CS strategies, everything from the data to the tech stack implementations, as well as even the segmentation and engagement strategy. And beyond that, I'm the host of the Customer on Success podcast, where I talk about things that don't go well in customer success. So check that out as far as to avoid some landmines. And also, I've been featured on the Churn FM, Digital CX podcast, and a few others. So feel free to check those out as well. But a little bit more on a personal level, I'm also a Jersey guy, but I'm actually based in South Florida. Fishing and boating, that's kind of more my scene. And fun fact, for about a year and a half, I was actually traveling the country, checking out different spots to call home as we sold our house back in New Jersey. And, one of my favorite spots was Lake Tahoe. California had an awesome, awesome spot. But anyway, that's not why you're here. Let's talk about building Tech Touch. Now, what exactly is Tech Touch? Tech Touch is a one-to-many strategy using data and technology and automation to manage customer experiences at scale to drive adoption and retention. And as mentioned, it's also known as digital customer success as of recently. And by the end of the webinar, I want you to take it one step forward. Whether you're just starting out with Tech Touch or refining what you've already built, which is great. It's not going to be about theory. We're going to talk about some action steps. And to do that, we'll walk through the 5 stages of Tech Touch. And the stages are strategy and segmentation. So you're going to focus on your best fit customers for this process. Data and operational hygiene. Without data, you can't really automate. And then the automation and tech stack piece of it, right? You're going to need to see what tools you have to avoid that manual task management or outreach management and know how to prioritize. You're going to scale that engagement or content and deliver it at the right time. And then testing and optimizing. Obviously, you're going to want to launch fast and learn fast so that way you can continuously improve. Now, let's get into it. Now, I'm curious in the comments or the chat rather, I'm curious as far as like what stage you guys are all struggling with the most. There's a lot here, but if you could drop that in the chat, just the number, that'd be awesome. Got it. No worries. Got a quiet group today. All right. 4. That's sort of scaled and engagement. We're going to talk about that as well. Awesome. So let's jump into it. The first, before I get into this, the most common objection that I hear is no one knows where to start. And really, my best recommendation is first creating a pilot group. So you're going to figure out who's actually going to go into this process. Here's some criteria that I look at when creating a pilot. I always recommend testing the long tail customers as they're the lowest risk in terms of ARR. And you would have a pretty good sample size because typically long tail means higher volume and lower ARR. And once you prove that success, then you can go and focus on your larger account segments. And as mentioned, Tech Touch was originally more of a customer segment. Now it's shifted more as a strategy, but it's still a good proving ground that whether it's SMB, long tail customers, because again, they're that lower risk. Now, when I first started building Tech Touch programs, we started with 60 accounts before we expanded to 700 plus, which was around 50 or so percent of that book of business. And from there, that's when we expanded those strategies to larger enterprise accounts and bigger companies. Now, a couple ways in which you could segment. You could focus on ARR based on the contract size relative to your organization. You could look at usage, or maybe it's industry, contract start and end dates, as well as even the company size or maybe their tenure if you have that data. Now, then you have to look at it at a micro level. So when we talk about, especially when we talk about outreach, right? You're going to segment based on contacts. Who are your decision makers versus your end users or your admin if it's a product solution? Or maybe it's just their activity. When's the last time they've logged in or engaged with your product? You'll also want to establish, and this is kind of how I like to start, what accounts or people you would like to exclude as well. So, and those use cases could be for a variety of reasons. It could be for human intervention strategies, excluding blockers, or maybe there's accounts that renewed and the process that you're running doesn't really make sense for them. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to break it down by different roles. So that way each of you could leave with something after this session as far as what you should be focusing on. Now, anybody that's VPs of CS, account management, you're going to need to start looking at KPIs to set, which will help with this segmentation. So if it's time to value, maybe you're going to want to focus on onboarding. If it's NRR or GRR, maybe you're going to want to figure out prioritize your renewal or upsell strategy. Now, CSMs, you're going to need to start to identify those accounts that should go into this model and why. So, for example, if you spend a lot of time working and supporting accounts, but there is no white space or growth opportunity, that might be a good fit for this. Then also start thinking about the types of communication that you're sending to customers as well and identify what's working and repeatable, or maybe it's a process that's tedious. Separate the tasks that require less brain power as well versus those that require more strategic input or human intervention. Now, CS ops, you're going to come up quite a bit in this because you're going to have to do a little bit of a lot of execution, not a little bit, but CS ops could also be revenue operations, sales operations. They typically have similar skill sets and will be able to help you on some of this. Now, based on this particular segment, you're going to go run reports to see if you could find these customers that the team has identified. Do you have the ability to identify that segment automatically when a new customer comes on board? When the VP of CS comes to you with questions like, hey, I need to assign a CSM to this particular cohort, once that's identified, how do you make sure that it's segmented and assigned in your systems going forward? So that's going to actually bring me to my next stage. Now, in the chat, I want to hear from you. How would you rate your data infrastructure and cleanliness? And the one thing I want to say, like, one being the worst, five being the best, you're not alone in this. I think that's the main thing I want to call out here because everyone struggles in terms of and how even they define the cleanliness. But I'll give it a minute, just take a pause and take a water break. Three, okay. Got it's I'll be honest, three's better than most. I've seen worse, but again, the one thing I want to leave you with is some key ways in which if it is in a bad place, at least I'll give you a way to get started. Now, of course, I get the common objections. Our data is too messy, or it lives in silos to automate anything. Or I get this objection, which is shocking. We're an early stage startup, and we can't focus on data cleanup. We need to focus on acquisition, which, yes, is partly true, but you're going to be in a worse off place down the road because even the best automation strategy will collapse if you try to start with bad data or lack of. So and it's really rarely about the tools in a lot of cases. It's rather understanding where the truth lives and where that data lives. So, the first step or second step here, you're going to want to conduct a high level data gap analysis. So, you're going to look to see where that data lives. Is it in your CSP, your CRM, support tools, billing systems? Now, here's my recommendation. When you're first starting out, you're going to want date fields are going to be your best friends because your start and end date. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a general idea of what should happen in a customer lifecycle at your organization, and also hopefully know when your contract starts and ends for those accounts. From there, then you could automate based on certain points of the life cycle for those touch points at a specific stage. And that's just to start off. Later on is when you could get a little bit more complex and so on. Now, VPs, you're going to want to define that source of truth. This way, you'll get reliable reporting, data-driven strategies, and for data-driven strategies and automation. And then, but more importantly, you have to give that vision. So, for example, here's a good way also to start looking into this. Start to work with your team to run some reports, whether it's in Salesforce or maybe it's a data visualization tool and so on. And start to look at to see what data values are actually missing. And don't be afraid to use spreadsheets at first. Focus on getting it piped into your CRM later or cleaning it up later. Just get a general idea. Spreadsheets are okay just to get going. Now, CSMs, you need to understand what data is needed in order and the impact it has to keep that machine running and what you're supposed to be doing in updating day in and day out. So that could be identifying particular deal stages, customer sentiment, logging calls with specific call notes or sentiment in those calls as well. And then now CS ops, you're going to need to understand how data is flowing and also then set those processes that the team needs to follow, what data needs to be mapped. So you're going to work also cross-functionally work with a team to standardize field names, right? Try to get a general understanding working with marketing or sales to understand what different definitions for different fields mean, who should own them in terms of updating and what that process should be. Now, for data updates as well, there's a couple ways in which that can happen. You need to understand if it's being updated manually by a person. Maybe it could be a product event or even some custom logic as well. That's often forgotten about. That could be a health score, maybe how you define a particular user based on their usage persona, right? Like a super user versus an active user. That might be some custom logic that's happening behind the scenes. Now, once you've done that, you're going to want to enforce required fields in your CRM or CSP or even process steps that keep that data clean and hygienic and consistent. So maybe deals can't move to a particular stage without updating certain variables or properties or fields. Or maybe it's particular milestones during implementation. So start to figure out what you could make required, and that's going to make your life a lot easier down the road. AI has also gotten in a better place as well for doing some data hygiene. And if you're a little bit more an organization that's a little bit more advanced, you might want to start to look into some of these. AI could do some simple data cleanups, whether that's you could pop something into OpenAI, Anthropic, or even you could utilize some platforms like Apollo.io or Clay to kind of fill in gaps. During my time at Business Insider, during our registration process, when I first came in, we had a lot of gaps in how we were collecting data, titles, location, and so on. So the data was fragmented because of that lack of a proper registration form. We actually leveraged Apollo to clean up those titles, names, locations, and so on. And that way we could start to identify new decision makers, look to expand to different departments when expanding the subscription. There's also some Clay use cases as well that's come up quite a bit. I've been experimenting and highly recommend utilizing it because you could start to merge duplicate contacts. You could start to do some pretty crazy stuff by doing waterfall enrichment across different data sources as well. But let's jump to the next step. And I'm curious because it's a constantly debated topic of if anybody is actually using a customer success platform. And in the chat, feel free to drop in the name. And if you're not, that's okay too. If you have a CRM, feel free to drop that in. And this is pretty much Plan Hat. Awesome. And you're going to have the data and process figured out. And then next is where you're going to have to understand like, hey, does my tech stack support automation or my vision? So now some of you are going to have more advanced tooling than others. And if you don't, that's okay. Okay. Gainsight. Awesome. Great tools. You guys are ahead of the game. But the one thing I want to say too is something that can be pretty controversial. If you're still having these troubles and you have some of these game-changing solutions, and they're great, by the way, you may need to ask yourself, hey, I might need to scale back. It might not be the right tool for right now. Not to say that they're powerful, but you might just need to start from the basics and then start to build out. So that brings me to my next step is, glitch there. Perfect. You're going to need to do a tech gap analysis and understand, hey, based on what I identified, does it support that vision? So go ahead and audit and look to leverage and integrate your existing tech stack with ideally your CRM. That should be your source of truth or your system of record. And again, if you're in that bucket where you don't have a CSP, such as Gainsight, Plan Hat, Churn Zero, I've recommended some solutions here because they're great to get started. And then also the reasonings why. So first, marketing automation, such as HubSpot, Marketo. Now, why? Marketing may already be using them and they're leveraging that similar data if it was properly implemented. And in some cases, it might have deliverability. And the reason I call that out is transactional emails. A lot of these solutions can send them, although I have seen CSPs give the ability to end users to send transactional emails as well, which is great. But in some cases, they might be relay services, not to get too technical, where they actually impersonate your inbox. So that could have an impact on deliverability purposes. But your CRM, again, if you have your data in your CRM, such as Salesforce, HubSpot, Why? I mean, why reinvent the wheel just to get started? If your data is already integrated, you're ready to scale, and it might have some of the features that you need, such as even custom dashboards and reporting. Now, again, I'm a big believer that your CRM should be your source of truth and then which everything connects to it. And to be honest, when you're doing this tech gap analysis, if you identify that, hey, a tool doesn't integrate with 80% of your tech stack, in my opinion, it should be excluded. But again, I understand people have contracts, it takes time to get out of them. But anyway, that's just my hunch there. Sales engagement platforms such as SalesLoft, Apollo, Outreach. Why? Of course, your sales team may already be leveraging it. And sometimes you could actually scale similar processes as CSPs through the use of sequences and cadences. And then if your data is in kind of disjointed and living in different places, you could utilize automation platforms such as Zapier and Make really to, again, sync that data into whatever solution, whether it's, again, those sales engagement platforms, CSP, CRMs, without needing a developer a lot of times if it has the native integration. Now, VPs. You're going to need to really define at this stage what end state looks like. And if you could wave a magic wand, what really should happen? Now, sometimes I hear, hey, we're not ready to invest in another tool. Now, and if you identify gaps, you better put a pretty good business case together and identify how that impacts your bottom line if you're really looking to get this going. And that could be just, hey, how do I scale without hiring more CSMs? Or how does it increase NRR and GRR? Now, the one thing I want to call out, you don't need a huge budget either. Many of the ones I mentioned are freemium solutions such as Apollo, HubSpot, Zapier, or at least free to start and at a very low cost. Now, CSMs, you're going to need to determine if how it's going to help you save X amount of hours, right? Am I able and how you're going to be able to use them in your day to day. So, for example, if you are leveraging Gainsight, right, or PlanHat, and maybe you have to leave the platform to get into the data that you need, okay, that might not be the best experience. Maybe it's related to the functionality of the platform, and maybe it's not properly integrated, which is the whole point of this gap analysis. So you're going to really need to lead with influence here, as it's going to directly impact your day to day, and more importantly, it's going to prevent you from burning out. That's what's important. And CS ops. You're going to need to figure out how everything plays nice. In the last slide, we talked about the data, the structure. So some examples of issues I've seen in the past is some of these tools have a hard time understanding or ingesting custom objects, and then it can't leverage the data for automation or just can't be seen. It's shocking, but I've seen it time and time again with CRMs and CSPs. But nevertheless, try to get a good understanding of how those things play nice together. Also, you're going to need to define the time that you need to implement or re-implement a solution and the cost associated with it. And also, do you feel comfortable with leveraging these tools in your day to day as well? And some examples, and when writing these reports, like, hey, if I buy X tool, CS Ops or RevOps, we're going to be spending less time connecting data manually or so on, or building reports for the team. So we could focus on Y projects. So it's a couple ways in which you could look at it. Now, this came up again, this is a repeat of the Customer Success Collective Summit that I did a few weeks back, and this came up quite a bit, so I wanted to talk about it. It's about usage reports, QBRs. So, and listen, I hear a lot of noise out there. QBRs are dead, or now they're EBRs, or value reviews, so on and so forth. Look, call them what you want, but at the end of the day, your customers are still going to need to understand the value and what they're getting, and more importantly, how is it impacting their business objectives. And your team needs a repeatable, data-backed way to show that progress and surface those insights, whether retention, expansion, re-engagement. So here are a few tools I recommend. Some of these tools, again, they have the functionality as well, potentially Gainsight, PlanHat, Churn Zero I've used as of recently, in which it has the ability to have shareable live reports, essentially ready for a QBR. That way your customers can access it directly and even on a particular frequency, whether it's monthly, so on and so forth. Data visualization tools. Why? These are often already used by your RevOps and analytics teams, whether it's reporting to the board or senior leadership. And basically, the CS team can tap into these systems to generate those first-party data reports, and then, of course, tailor by cohort, product line, and industry, and so on. An example of this was working with a team where we actually had Power BI, and you were able to integrate a PowerPoint deck directly within it and generate a report for each cohort. And that way, the charts updated. It was customized to that organization with proper branding. and it was dynamically adjusted based on the data in the segment. Clay is pretty interesting. Full transparency, I haven't leveraged this myself, but it's something that just came out, in which it's of course a powerhouse of a tool when it comes to data enrichment and automation. But now you could actually generate Google Slides at scale by incorporating your data and with dynamic tags, similar to other email solutions where you're bringing in those dynamic content. You could do the same thing with Google Slides. So great for QBR decks. And then, of course, you could do it dynamically, saving tons of time and manual work. Now, for VPs, you're going to need to really define what story needs to be told, right? What are those core metrics that matter to the business and the customer? Are you showing success, risk, or value? And if the budget is a concern as well, some of these tools are, again, freemium, right? Metabase is free to start, as well as Clay. CSMs, own the narrative. You need to be able to essentially walk a customer through these reports, make sure it's clear, strategic, and then also be confident. But you need to really bring to leadership what you're currently sending to the customer, because that's going to make their life easier as well, to see what's really working. And then, of course, maybe you're seeing a trend. Is it a particular business or business type or specific industry or region that typically ingest information in a certain way? And then, of course, ops, your job is to make sure the data works and ensure that it's syncing all together and integrating with those sources, making sure that, of course, the reporting is scalable, repeatable, aligned with CS's needs. And then, of course, making sure that data can be transformed, right? Making sure that if you have health scores or usage personas, the point is, the bottom line, you don't have to build reporting from scratch. You just need to tap in some of these tools, just as the last slide, that already exists in your stack. So that way you're not doing things manually. Now, next step, right? You have the tools. What are you going to send them? Okay. And sometimes I hear we don't have enough education and content for automation. You don't need a massive library. Listen, at the end of the day, you just need relevant, timely guidance delivered automatically. And by the way, the them can actually be the CSM or your team, not just the customer, because that's the main thing, right? It's keeping the team scalable and how they work with customers, and that might be just serving a playbook. But let's talk more about it. So the content you're going to be sending them is going to be through automated or even semi-automated sequences, plays, campaigns, or in even templates or repeatable touch points, which then could also be strategically personalized through the dynamic content or fields. Those can consist of emails and product messaging to your clients, or queuing up phone calls with call scripts or guidance, or even playbooks for CSMs to complete when a certain event happens, right? That might be like, hey, the DM has left the organization. You have a sequence or a playbook to follow to make sure you could find a new one that's standardized. And maybe an account is at risk of a renewal based on a particular customer sentiment from a phone call. Great. CSM should follow these next steps in order to potentially save that account. Now, VPs. A common mistake I see is where that standardization of content becomes lukewarm. You really should be thinking about how it will help the CSM as well as the client take that action. For example, if you're sending a usage report, make sure it has some next steps, right? Like if you don't have any next steps or context, you're going to frustrate the client, and then in turn, they're going to be frustrated with the CSM, and then nobody's happy. So just keep in mind that standardization is important. Just make sure it drives action and sets up everyone for success. Now, you're also going to need to determine what to send, what type of messaging based on that segment. You'll want to send information on how to solve common problems. So, next step, take a look at your knowledge base. Is it up to date, or do you even have one? You're going to need to really scale then the creation if you don't have one, or if you need to create new documentation. So I've included some tools here, such as Tango, Reveal Automation, Scribe, or maybe you can even create some simple Loom videos to create that content. It's some scalable ways. They're quick. The tools that follow your steps, such as Scribe, Reveal, and Tango, will actually follow your process, and then using AI automatically create that documentation for you. So, and again, there are low-cost solutions as well. CSMs. These are where the VPs are really going to need you. Out of self-interest, based on what you're currently sending, you're going to need to tell them what's resonating with the customer base. What are you sharing with customers or using, and what are they using to help themselves? And you're on the front lines. You're going to need to tell leadership. So your VPs aren't really mind readers. So always tell them like, hey, what's working, what's not. Like the biggest mistake I see is the water cooler talk, right? Like, hey, oh, this isn't working, or the complaints, whatever it might be. Listen, I understand the area of grievances, but the point is you have to manage up when you see those challenges. and identify those opportunities and really speak up when things are really working. And if you can do that regularly, you could really advance in your career. So the CS ops team, by this time, the team has already come with material that you should trust that it's digestible and ready to scale. Now it's your job to figure out, well, how to scale it in a repeatable format. Think about the problem and the solution, and then think about how to get it going, right? So, for example, maybe the VP has identified, hey, we want an opportunity, right, to segment particular customers on how to upsell, right? The CSM has now identified the messaging that's worked for prospecting. Your job as CS ops is to build the cadence and, better yet, identify how to automate at the right time. Based on my experience leading ops teams, the great ops person is going to be bringing those recommendations, such as maybe it's like, hey, we've noticed with the sales team that a multi-channel approach or video has been really working. Fantastic. Come with that recommendation to a meeting to express, hey, this is what's working, because that might be a great opportunity for customer success as well. So if you notice those trends, bring them up. And also, AI has come up quite a bit on content generation. No kidding. I've actually worked with organizations where we create a custom GPT about their business, even down to the tone as well. I actually use this for my own business as well when creating life cycles. If you want access to that, you'll see the QR code at the end where you could ask how to build digital CS strategies and so on. But the point is here, when developing that content, create that GPT that's custom to your business. That way, when you have to create new ones, you can go and have that help you out too. Now, the last step, right? Test, measure, and optimize. It's not a set it and forget it machine. The only way it works long term is if you continuously review it. So the key action item here is conduct an internal QBR with on your Tech Touch model. And VPs, you're going to need to be able to tie that engagement strategy directly to the business impact, retention, NRR, time saved, FTE hours. Additionally, you're going to need to continuously communicate to leadership and the C-level especially, the ability to test and pivot. Automation can break. They need to understand that and ensure that they're aligned of those risks. And also your team does too, right? They need to be able to spot when these issues come up. Also, CSMs need to be solution oriented, as mentioned, and identify those opportunities. Tie the solution, be oriented, solution oriented, and then bring that for the journey improvement recommendations. Tell if something is not working or how clients are reacting to it. And an example of this is I was working myself as a CSM, and I noticed a sequence that worked really well for identifying new champions at a larger account. And it had a high call conversion rate. Great. I brought it up to ops. I brought it up to CS leadership, and then they eventually expanded it, standardized it for the rest of the team to utilize, which was helped them tremendously. So now CS ops, your job was also to identify the areas for growth as well. Why? Because you have some of the data. So for example, I was actually shifted to the ops team, and by doing an analysis of our data, we were able to scale the upsells for renewals and upsell increases. So as high as 20%, all through email and scalable outreach, and even converted 10% of our book of business, a large book of business, to multi-years, which ultimately stabilized the book. But that was all through automation, but also careful segmentation based on analyzing the data. So the tools, by the way, that you're leveraging and you're managing, and hopefully the ops team, remember, you're managing them. So in these QBRs, I want you to bring any new features that can impact the business. And an example of this, I recently spoke with a company that was using Gong, and their tech stack was Salesforce. Great, both great tools. And they ended up building a custom, they had issues with data gaps of adding notes to Salesforce. And to standardize it for the team, they realized it wasn't working. So they were trying to figure out new solutions. Long story short, there was a new package for Gong to do it automatically that was out for about 6 months, and the ops team wasn't aware of it. The point is, you could save a lot of that time by having a better understanding of your tools, and again, goes back to that tech gap analysis and bringing those recommendations, because it'll make your life easier and then, of course, have a bigger impact on the team. So ideally, ops keep bringing those recommendations, those new features to these internal QBRs and figure out how to best support the team. But the one thing I want to, make sure we have time for questions at the end. But before we get into that, we covered a lot. So I want to leave you with this. Tech Touch has evolved. It's no longer just about automation and SMBs. You need clear segmentation and be able to create that Tech Touch pilot group. You also need that clean, connected data, but don't fret. You still have date fields to start off, right? And then, of course, you need the tech to get things going. And there are some low tech solutions, or excuse me, low budget solutions to kind of get things going. And remember, content's the engine. It's going to enable you to do all of this. But don't forget to always test, measure, and evolve. So if any of this has resonated with you and you need to do something similar or want to build something together, I'm actually offering a complimentary audit for your Tech Touch readiness. You just got to book it before July 31st through the meeting link, which is in the QR code. That'll also take you to everything, my podcast, my website, my newsletter, everything, a ton of different resources, or you could just email me as well. That's on there too. So thanks for all of you joining me today. But I'm going to open up for questions if there are any, and I'll leave this up for a few minutes. And feel free to, come on audio or throw them in the chat. Awesome, awesome. No worries. If there are no questions, again, you could always feel free to shoot them over following this call as well. You have my email there. But again, I want to thank you, Kyle. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Again, let me know. Feel free to take advantage of this. This is a great opportunity as well. But if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Again, my name is Joe Di Grande. I'm the founder of Joe Does Tech Touch, and I hope we could build something together. Together.